I'd like to welcome Sarah Allen Wiseman and Rosalie LaRouche. They are both social workers who are working at the Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice, and they're going to be chatting with us tonight about supporting children and adolescents who are grieving. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. I think we can introduce ourselves and then start with the slides in the presentation. I'm Rosalie. I am a social worker by trade at Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice. My role is a grief service coordinator. So I am the first point of contact to families that are accessing our grief support services. And then I help also with our services, so groups, and to facilitate other services. And then Sarah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Lovely. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Sarah. I'm a social worker at CHIO with our palliative care team, as well as at Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice. So I have the unique ability of supporting our families with the who are followed by the palliative care team, as well as our families that we meet in bereavement.
Thanks, Sarah. So like all these Thursday evening series, we have to start with a little disclosure. So we are both employees of, well, Sarah is employed by CHIO, and then I'm employed by Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice, but we're both part of the same team and working for these organizations. There are no other conflicts that we need to identify for tonight's presentation. We can go right ahead. Our agenda for tonight, we will give you, for those of you who don't know Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice, a little overview of who we are and what we do. We will then talk about pediatric palliative care and do a little bit of a review of grief theories. We will then go more specifically into children and adolescents and their grief reactions, and then we'll talk about strategies that you can use with families or with children and adolescents themselves. Okay. Our objectives for tonight are that you can recognize grief reactions in children and adolescents when you are working with them. So being able to identify what is a grief reaction, and then to apply strategies to care for a grieving young person. So being able to help them and support them. And then our third objective is to be able to assess when and which support might be needed. So when an extra layer of support might be needed. We want to start with our land acknowledgement. Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice is located in Ottawa, Ontario, on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We respect the traditional knowledge and healing developed over generations. We reflect on Indigenous people and their ancestors' relationship with this land for thousands of years. So Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice, is only one of a handful of pediatric hospice palliative care facilities that exist across Canada. There are not many that do what we do. We are committed to enhancing the quality of young lives, easing a difficult journey, creating and enduring legacy. We are a home-like environment. So when you go to Roger Nielsen Children's Hospice, it is different from when you go to a hospital, and we're there to support families in the most challenging journey that they can experience. We have different programs. We have the Pediatric Hospice Palliative Care Program, which is supporting children who have a life-limiting illness. We take a family-first approach, so we are focused, of course, on enhancing the quality of life of the child, but also on a wraparound support for the entire family, including parents and caregivers, siblings, and uncles, aunts, and the extended family members. We also have a very beautiful perinatal palliative care hospice program where we support families who are going through either the loss or knowing that their life from 20 weeks of pregnancy their baby will not live a long life. So we support those families as well. And then we have our grief support services, which support a lot of people. We can skip to the second one where we talk a little bit more about what we offer. So our grief support services are offered both for our families that go through our palliative care programs, perinatal or pediatric, but also for anyone in the community who experienced the loss of a child or an infant. So from 20 weeks of pregnancy up to 18 years of life. So an accident, something sudden, we are there to support those families as well. So we do individual and family grief support assessment. And we, from that assessment, will create a plan of care for each family member who will access our services. We offer a group-based grief support for parents, caregiver, children, and youth. We also have groups for grandparents and those groups for our perinatal lost parents. And then we also have those workshops, which tonight is a enhanced version of that. But we offer monthly workshop for families, caregivers, family friends who are supporting a young griever and want to learn a little bit more. And then we also have workshops for professionals who can attend a different workshop. Those are bi-monthly, but we offer that as well at free of charge for our community. We wanted to share this very special wall. What you see the picture on the left is our legacy wall. It's hard to tell. It's really hard to picture the beauty of that wall, but those are all very unique stars that represents all the lives of the children and babies that we either have seen and supported at the hospice or got the privilege and honor to know through their parents and our grief support services. Those stars are also represented, as you can see on the right, in our logo, which was brand new logo from last year. We're very excited, but those 3 stars represent the moment in time when we would have engaged with the family, so gotten involved with the family, either at time of diagnosis, somewhere throughout illness, or during your grief journey. So those represent the stars. And then it's also a way for us to remember and honor all those children and all those short lives. We wanted, before jumping into anything, to quickly put that slide that you will get at the end, but how to send a referral to our grief support services. It's fairly straightforward. You can send an email to our grief support email address or give us a phone call, which would be my extension, but to our grief services coordinator. And the family can also self-refer using the same email or phone call. All families, like I said, who are grieving the loss of a child can refer, but you now can also refer children and adolescents who experience the loss of someone significant, their parent, grandparent, a close friend, someone that they're grieving and who need support for. So this is a quick slide for us to just plug in that you can refer those families to us.
Before we move into this next section, is there, I'm sharing my screen, but I think I saw a few chats pop up. Is there anything?
No, it's actually me, and I've just found out from Carl, who's texted me to say that there's a problem with the chat. So I'm working on getting the chat enabled.
Okay.
So I know about the problem and I'm working on it.
Okay, well, I will continue, but hopefully shortly we'll be able to get that going for some engagement. So we'll move into supporting children and adolescents who are grieving. And I want to just take a pause, take a moment to recognize that every single one of us signing onto this call and doing this work in whatever way that is, we're all people too. And so these speak to many human experiences and emotions. And so please take notice and honor what you need throughout this presentation. And I encourage everyone to notice that with curiosity. What might that bring up for you, which can help us to get to know ourselves that little bit better in terms of how to cope with this work. And we can then learn a little bit more from that in terms of how to best support ourselves and honor our boundaries. I also always like to just acknowledge and share my appreciation for all of the families who have invited me into their lives to bear witness to their deep love, grief, to introduce us to their children, as Rosalie said. It is the honor of a lifetime to get to know these families. So I grew up with Mr. Rogers, and this is a quote that has always stuck with me. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. And so it is an honor to be on a call like this with so many helpers in our community. So thank you to all the helpers that are supporting folks in our community for so many ways. And I think it can be important to take that time to just honor ourselves as well. So this is a chat question. And Rosalie, because I can't see the chat, I might just need you to briefly summarize for me. But how often do you interact with children and youth who are grieving?
We have some not often, some a few times a month, very often, never.
Okay.
So
Amazing.
it's a range. Yeah.
All across.
Rarely.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you all for being here and participating in chat. We'll have a few chat times throughout, but our next option is a poll. So if we can bring up the poll, and I'll be curious for so many of us who work in palliative care, if you can see what the tie-in, pun intended, is to the next two slides. But if we could pull up the Zoom poll, so curious to hear what people think about this.
So we have someone that want to know a little bit, what is the question, like those option 1 and 2?
Do you think, fair enough, do you think that a giraffe would wear the bow tie like they would in option 1, or do you think a giraffe would wear a bow tie like they are in option 2? So up high at the very top of their neck or down lower towards their body?
People are giving this a lot of thought.
I appreciate that.
Just over half of folks have weighed in now.
Okay, and what's it looking like? Or we don't know yet, we'll share it, right?
Yeah. Actually at 65-35 right now. So 65% picked option 1 and 35% picked option 2.
Fantastic. That is great. I brought this question to my to folks both at the office and in my personal life, and it has been about 50-50 the whole time. So I just thought it would be a fun way to lead us into talking about some theory. So this is our historic bow tie model of palliative care, which I imagine folks are quite familiar with. But one of the pieces I just wanted to highlight of this historic model is the fact that bereavement is highlighted, but there isn't a specific mention of grief, which is I find very interesting. And so as we move to our updated bow tie model, which is where we got the idea for the giraffe, is a much more integrated model. And there are many folks who could speak more to this than I, but I did just want to highlight the importance of recognizing that there can be a benefit to having a palliative approach to address the needs for pain and symptom management, as well as the psychosocial and spiritual support for patients and their families. So I think it's important to recognize. And one iteration that I hope in time might be added would be an acknowledgement of the both grief and anticipatory grief that can exist when somebody is experiencing or going through an experience of either a palliative care diagnosis, life-limiting illness. So that's one of my hopes for the future. So this is our next poll, which is, how many children do you think experienced the death of a sibling or a parent in Canada by the age of 18? 1 in 10, 1 in 14, 1 in 30, or 1 in 50 children and youth.
Can you see the results there?
I can,
Yeah.
yes. So it looks like predominantly 1 in 30. Okay, great. Thank you for participating in that. So the statistic is actually more frequent than that. So 1 in 14 children will experience the death of a parent or sibling by age 18. And I'll move to our next slide, which this information, fortunately, is Canadian statistics, which I think is incredibly important. So often information can be based off of other countries that may have other unique experiences as well. So from the census in 2016, they were able to gather the information that says 1 in 14 children. So that equates to about 1 child in every other classroom being bereaved. And this is a really significant number in impacting a number of children across our country. And we know that the death of a parent or sibling is found to be one of the most stressful events that a child or youth can experience. And so it's an incredibly important piece of information. And yet, I don't think that it's very well known just how many, very well known anecdotally, just how many children and youth have experienced such a significant death before they've turned the age of 18. And so I want you to carry that information with you to recognize that if you're in a group of kids, there's so many that might be carrying grief and the love in their heart for somebody that is no longer there. This information is from an American study that interviewed school teachers and after-school professionals. And what they found in this, in terms of the information, which can be found online, we'll link the research because it was quite interesting, was that 77% of respondents would be comfortable to talk about their loss with a healthcare provider. 83% strongly or somewhat agreed that there should be a greater focus on training healthcare professionals to support grieving families. And 83% believed healthcare professionals are critical to connect bereaved children to support and resources with prior knowledge of a death. So in that more palliative care or anticipatory grief space. I had to seek out the majority of the training that I did when it comes to grief. Not a lot of it was taught in my schooling in social work. And so I think it's a really important piece, again, of information to carry, that when we are moving through either our career or speaking with folks who might be newly entering the field, to really talk about this and to say, listen, you will be interacting and interfacing with kids who are grieving or people who are grieving. In tonight's presentation context, it's children and young people. But I think it's really important to know that the want is there for people to talk about grief. It does not need to be the elephant in the room. I wish it wasn't. So I think this was an important piece to share. What holds people back often are fears when it comes to grief. And I'll talk to folks often about the fact that sometimes we don't know what to say to an adult who is grieving. And then you add in the fact that it's a child or an adolescent who's grieving, and there can be even more fears or insecurities. So these can include, I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm not sure if this is normal. Maybe it is normal and it's not grief, so I don't need to talk about it. Worried about making it worse. A number of folks I've talked to in the context of healthcare have wondered, is it my place? Or in the school system, is it my place to speak with this young person about their grief? And so I think there are, unfortunately, a lot of worries or fears that hold us back, which means instead of showing up awkward and not totally knowing what to say, but showing up, we end up receding and not saying anything. And that can leave a lot of kids pretty lonely. So I hope that we're able to find our ways to be showing up brave and awkward for the children in our lives. So I put this comic in any presentation I do. This was shared with me by Nora's mom. So Nora died a few years ago, and I met with her parents for grief and bereavement counseling. And her mom gave this to me. And so the bear is saying, "Can you fix it?" And the bunny says, "No, I can't fix that. I'm sorry, but I'll help you hold it." And Nora's mom said to me, that's what I feel like grief counseling is. I didn't come in thinking you'd be able to fix something. Grief is not broken. It's a natural experience. But you can help create a space where this can just be held. And so I deeply hope that every single one of the folks watching this has a bunny in your own life that you can go to with your hard things. And I really hope that we can all act as bunnies for young people who need that support and need a space to come and talk. Okay, pass it back to you, Rosalie.
Thanks, Sarah. I think people love this picture as much as you do, as we all do. I think it's beautiful.
Oh, good. I have it right above my desk. I have a sticker of it in my desk that I look at every day.
There is Sandra in the chat, and I think it is completely true. It says people are afraid of talking about dying, death, and grief. We need to normalize conversations. Yeah, we need to talk about that more.
Thank you for saying that.
So let's talk about grief a little bit more. Let's talk about it more tonight. Grief is something that will affect everything for yourself and for your life. It encompasses your emotional, cognitive, spiritual, physical, existential experience. That is something that you live after your loss. We here at Roger Nelson Children's Hospice and tonight talk a lot more about grief after a death loss, but there is grief also after other types of loss. A move, a separation, losing a job, right? There are griefs, different types of griefs a little bit everywhere. And those will all have impact in different types, in different ways in our lives. There is a difference in the English language that we talk about grief, and that's what you think and feel on the inside. And then there's the mourning. Mourning is when you express that grief outside. So when you cry, when you talk about your person, when you interact and show that grief on the outside. And funnily enough, in the French language, we don't really have a difference. We only have grief, le deuil, right? We only say deuil. We can't really make a difference. And I think this is something that we miss in the French language, because it's important to understand that there are different facets of grieving. There is a grief, and then there is mourning, and those are different. A little bit of what we all learn, I think, when we first did our schooling growing up to the traditional grief theory, which was created actually for patients who were dying themselves. So those stages, the predictable stages, and that ends with acceptance, were not for grieving people who were grieving the loss, the death of someone else. They were for someone who were terminally ill and then going towards death. And it's where you expect a full resolution of your grief. It's where you expect that at some point, and we've all also heard like timelines in the past, right? It's where that theory also talks about how this is an internal and private process. It's not something that's relational or that you share with other people. And in that way of expecting a resolution or expecting an acceptance of the grief, it also expects that the bereaved, so the person who lost someone, will kind of like let go of their attachment to the deceased, to the person that they loved so deeply, and still do, right, even after that person dies. So that's where this all comes from. That's where this theory, which isn't wrong in itself for what it was researched for, those terminally ill patients, adults as well, not children. But for some reason, we started using it for all grief, all types of grief, which isn't the reality. The new, more contemporary theory that is more renowned now is the dual process model of coping with bereavement. And I say new, but it's 1995, so it's not that new. But something that's a little newer, I guess, is where you bounce between what we call loss-oriented coping, so things that focus on your grief. When you go to counseling, when you think about your grief, when you're intentional in your grief, look at pictures, talk about your person, focusing on your grief. And then there's the other side of that, which is the restoration-oriented, where you focus on making meaning of your new life, when you try to rebuild your life. So what is that new identity after losing a parent or a sibling? What are some new things you want to do and experience now in that new normal? What are some things that you might want to try, some new relationships that will develop? And then in that theory, you bounce between those two. Sometimes you will be intentional. Sometimes you will be hit by a wave of grief without being intentional, but you will be more in your grief. And then there is the everyday life in between. And then sometimes you will be more focused on your future. So there's always a little bit of a back and forth, and it's never stagnant in one place. Rolling
It's
around.
far away from those theories. Can we just go to the chat box for a minute?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I didn't see it. Go ahead.
There are a few comments. So somebody has mentioned that mourning often is viewed as a set of processes and grief does not have a time limit.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And it's something that we have down in a few slides, right? There is no time limit. There is, I think, in past experiences and knowledge, that 1 year mark, right? After 1 year, you should be okay and back to normal, but there is no time limit. We say at the hospice, if you love that person, yeah, thank you. It's going to stay with you, right? The expectation is that it gets better, and then after 1 year, it should be resolved. But in reality, there are those waves here again, and that you will continue to grieve that person 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, forever, right? As long as you still live yourself, you will grieve the person that you lost. Thank you for that comment.
One of the
thank you.
comments is it's time. It makes me crazy when people say it's time to move on or you need to get over it. And one of the best responses I heard to that was from a bereaved mom that I worked with, and she said, "I just want to say back, oh, are you over celebrating your kid's birthday then? Are you over it? Is it okay? They're 7 now. We're over it. They've had 7 birthdays. It's okay. We don't have to do it again." You know, we don't move on, and we don't need to get over it. But I just thought that was such when you start flipping the narrative, it can be really eye-opening just how upsetting comments are made towards grieving people, versus if they were said in another way, just how upsetting they are.
Yeah. There's also, I see a comment, grief always makes me think of ocean waves. Yes. Yeah, us too. We often refer to waves. Sometimes you will, I think when your person first died, it feels like a tsunami, right? The waves are huge and you kind of like drown a little bit in that you can't really see where you're going. And then as times pass, the tsunami maybe is gone itself, but there are still waves here and there that will hit you. Sometimes you see them coming and sometimes you don't. And that's always going to be like that.
I had a kid say to me once that and it was a little bit of time had passed since their sibling had died, and they said, I used to be swimming in the grief and it was all the time, and now it feels a bit like my toes are in the sand, and the water of grief is always lapping. It's always lapping at my feet. And sometimes now when I'm standing and looking at the water, I can see a tsunami. I can see the big wave coming. And that's an anniversary or a special day or a memory that I can see coming. But sometimes now I have my back to the ocean and I'm not able to see when that big wave is coming, and it knocks me off my feet. And I think that imagery can be so powerful. And so to hear this young person reflect on that was a really beautiful way to describe how they experience their grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should I go? Did I miss any? A cat. Ooh, I visualize it's moving the black chasm of loss from between you and everything else to being able to have it beside you as you live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you addressed most of them. They're
Okay, great. Thank you, Tara.
Thanks. Do you want to go back to the
Wanna go
previous
back? Yeah.
slide? Yeah, it's that one. Yeah. But I think it's also another big misconception that people have is that your grief, people think that grief slowly gets smaller as time go, when in reality your grief stays the same, right? Your love for that person doesn't change, and you're still grieving that person, but you slowly grow around your grief, and as life continue, as you work towards other things, then you will grow bigger around it. It's kind of like we often with children and even with adults have used the big rocks. So like when you first lose someone, the rock feels so heavy and big that you can hold it. The only way to hold it is with both your hands. So you can't really do anything else because you're only focusing on holding that rock and surviving to that weight. And then as time goes, the rock doesn't get smaller, but you get stronger. And then you don't maybe need those both hands to hold that rock, but you can hold it just with one hand and you can do other things with that other hand. So that's a little bit another way to see it, right? Is that grief is going to stay the same, but you'll get stronger in being able to hold that grief while doing other things. When at the beginning, that weight kind of like takes everything. So that's another misconception that we like to break a little bit. I think we talked about that a little bit, so maybe we can skip to the other one, 2 types of grief. There are multiple types of grief. A big one when you work in palliative care is the anticipatory grief. So knowing that the death is coming, knowing that the loss is coming. It's not necessarily the only thing that you will be grieving isn't necessarily just the death, but when you have someone in palliative care, you will see those small losses also beforehand, right? With our families, with our children and young people that we have, we call them guests in the house. But with our guests, there are some milestones or some things that sometimes they have to grieve, right? The fact that a child will maybe stop walking at some point, or there is a difference of they were able to eat by themselves and now they need a G-tube to feed. So those are all losses that you have in anticipatory grief. A big one that we work with too is disenfranchised grief. People who lose children, either perinatal or at an older age, is something we don't talk about. Our society isn't comfortable talking to bereaved parents, talking about bereaved parents. This isn't something that you can talk freely in the space. And when people ask you how many children you have, it's hard for our families to navigate all that. So it's often something that isn't super recognized and is disenfranchised. There are other types of grief as well, like chronic grief, prolonged grief, complicated grief, traumatic grief. And those are not necessarily, you won't necessarily have only one type of grief. You can have many at the same time, and they will change and flux. during the time. We wanted to use a video right after to talk a little bit more about that anticipatory grief, knowing that a lot of you work in palliative care. So Sarah, if you want to come to the video.
Years. Although there may be times of stability where life feels more manageable, events like a change in a person's condition, an admission to hospital, or a move to residential care can reawaken feelings of grief. When supporting someone in this situation, it can be helpful to think of it as accompanying them for a short part of their journey. It can be difficult to know what to say. Saying things like, "At least they're still here," is generally not helpful. Sometimes it's appropriate not to say anything at all, but just be with them, giving them a safe space to talk, cry, or just be. Affirming with people that how they're feeling is a natural response to grief or loss, or simply acknowledging their thoughts and feelings can also be an important first step. People may also appreciate being directed to sources of support. Meeting with others who are going through a similar experience can be a comfort. Finding ways of connecting with a person with dementia through music or by sharing happy memories can be helpful. For parents, making memories with their child and any siblings can be very valuable. Supporting the wider family is also important. Helping relatives feel more prepared and making an anticipatory care plan can help them navigate this time. This can help with some of the fear or uncertainty before and around the time of death. When an adult or child dies after a long illness, a new wave of grief is usually triggered in those close to them. Families say that it can feel as though they lose the person twice. It's important for health and social care teams to recognise this. It's unhelpful to make comments about the death bringing relief. People may be comforted knowing their relative is no longer suffering, but it's still likely to be a very painful time and can come as a shock. Often, a simple acknowledgement of their loss is most appropriate. Experiencing a long period of anticipatory grief doesn't necessarily lessen feelings of grief at the time of death. The sudden loss of a caring role and contact with people such as nurses or carers can also be isolating. Be sensitive about the removal of aids and equipment from their home and ask the family about their wishes. Try to affirm the important role they had in caring for the person who has died. Small acts of sympathy are often important to families. This may be as simple as a letter of condolence or a phone call. A meeting with the healthcare team may also be appropriate, but consider where best to do this. Returning to a hospital or care setting might be a painful experience.
Thank you. It's a little bit of a longer video than we would normally put in a slide, but we thought this was a great video to talk about anticipatory grief. This is something that we all see, I think, in our practice in palliative care, and is important. We don't always think of all those losses. We don't always think, and if you can see in this picture that there are so many things that someone who is grieving anticipatory that will think about, that will worry about, that will not always share with us, with their family, especially with children and youth. They don't always share that with their parents, if their parents, for example, is the one who's in palliative care. So, how will I cope without you? Will I be there when you die? All those things are things that they have in their brain and think about. And if we don't open up the conversation, if we don't open up the space for them, then they keep that inside. And we may assume that they don't have those thoughts or worries, when in reality they do, and just keep it inside, and those are normal reaction and very common worries and thoughts. So yeah, it's important to open the space. Go ahead, you can switch. We want us to ask you, so please write down in the chat, because unfortunately you can't unmute yourself, but how might the anticipatory grief show up in your setting where you're working at, and in your role of supporting people in palliative care?
While we wait for a few responses, I think it's really important to, as you said, recognize that young people may have those experiences of anticipatory grief for things that as adults we might not think about. And so either connecting with others who can help you with some conversation starters, or we have some later on, can be important. So Rosalie, there's a few in the chat. Quite a few in the chat. Thank you. Supply. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can read them. There's also a question that we can answer in there.
Return of supplies and equipment. It feels like losing them again. Absolutely. I've heard that, especially with mobility aids that gave people the opportunity to move through this world, that's an extension of them. And that can be impressively, unfortunately, misunderstood. So knowing that's something on people's minds. Is it common for people to feel empty and not sure how to even find joy again? Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think grief is very lonely for everyone. So at first you feel like you're stuck in that and feeling empty and not sure how appear again is very common. Yeah.
The waiting for their loved one to die or decline. Absolutely. The person having a hard time adjusting and accepting the functional losses and increasing care needs. Yes, absolutely. I work in long-term care. It's the last place on their journey. Yeah. Worries about how to run a household without their loved one's support. As a hospice volunteer, I find that grief from earlier losses can come up years later. Absolutely. Reduce visits, crying. Could a child be angry that a parent will not be there for a future special occasion? Feel betrayed? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think with that, and we maybe speak a little bit to this as we talk about the different ages of children and experiences with grief. But I think with that, sometimes for a younger child, they may not have that ability to think yet that far into the future. But as they grow and after their person dies, they might begin to have these realizations of, oh, so many people around me have their caregiver at graduation. Mine aren't there. And some of these events might happen later, where some older teens might be more acutely aware of the events that their person will not be present for physically. And so sometimes that can mean that there can be some legacy planning and conversations and reflections on that. And unfortunately, sometimes it is something that is discovered or talked about later. Express guilt for being tired, needing a break. Will we address how to get out of emptiness and finding joy again? I think so. And if we don't, please prompt us again. I think we do, but definitely prompt us if we don't.
Talk a little bit later more about strategies and supporting.
Yeah. Why my child? Absolutely. Knowing that they will not see their loved one grow up and experience life's milestones. Watch for upcoming birthdays and special times like Easter, Christmas, graduations, etc.
Yeah. it comes up in so many ways, and sometimes we think with our adult brain, who have maybe probably lost someone in our lives, right? Because everybody will be bereaved and experience grief at one point in your life. But grief shows up differently for everyone, and it shows up differently for children and adolescents. So it's hard to know how it can show up for each and every one of us. And it also changes through time, right? We've seen someone mention how you have grief in earlier losses, and then years later there's also those new waves. So it will come and goes as the waves of the ocean. And then yes, some will be big losses, and then some will be maybe a little easier for someone, and then harder for someone else. So everybody will have different losses throughout their grief journey, for sure. Yeah, those are great examples. Thanks, everyone. These peaks pretty loud to us. Welcome to the Grief Club, right? This isn't a club that anyone wants to be a part of, but this is a club that everyone at one point will be a part of. But it's important that children and adolescents and even adults shouldn't go through grief, shouldn't have to go through grief alone. So having a community, having other people that they can talk about their grief with, having a space to talk about their person without judgment, and somewhere where it's open and okay is very important. And then the right one is all those emotions and feelings that you can feel, sometimes all at the same time. Sometimes in a range of like 5 minutes, you'll go from feeling guilty for, not being able to stop what happened, and then feeling happy, and then feeling numb. Like you can go through those, someone said earlier, roller coasters. Yeah, you can go through that so quickly. And then sometimes it's on a longer period of time, and that's also okay and normal. But yeah, sometimes you are angry, you feel betrayed. Sometimes you're happy and find joy, and then you feel guilty because you're happy after losing someone. So grief is messy. Grief is complicated. We see that as linear sometimes, but it's a whole big mess of emotion and feelings, and it's hard to make sense of it sometimes. And the goal, our goal at least, is that they don't have to make sense of it alone. Someone who's grieving shouldn't have to make sense of their grief alone, and should have some support around them.
I have used this image in the past with adults and kids in different contexts. And one of the things we'll speak about is how each member of a family is riding their own unicycle. And that recognition that roles might shift and change in a family unit after somebody dies. And what often happens too is, while people might be grieving for the same person, just as they had an individual relationship with that person, they will also grieve for that person in their own way. And so sometimes we'll bring up this image to show, just as much as 12-year-old sibling are grieving for your grandparent who died, so you're grieving that unique relationship and riding this unicycle, so is your parent who's grieving the death of their parent. And so it's that it can open up a really powerful conversation as a family unit about how do we all ride these unicycles together at home, all around each other all the time.
Thanks, Sarah. A few signs that you may see. Here we talk about children and adolescents, but they can also show up in adults as well when someone's grieving. Like we mentioned earlier, grief will touch everything, right? So there are some physical signs of grief, like you may have difficulty sleeping, not feeling hungry or eating a lot, restlessness, so feeling like you can't really sit and do nothing, like you have to always be moving. Then there are some emotional signs, which once again can be everything or nothing all at once. And then sometimes you're worried, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're feeling guilty, and then other times you might be feeling numb and happy and relieved because your person isn't suffering anymore, or because maybe the relationship was tricky and difficult with your caregiver or with your sibling. And then that feeling of being relieved can also bring some guilt as well. So it's complicated emotionally when you're grieving to navigate all those feelings. And for children, we talk about that a little bit, but they grieve in puddles, in spurs, right? So they will jump into a puddle of grief and be really into that wave, and then 2 minutes after they can go into another puddle of playing under something else. But those emotional reactions for children will often be quick and in the moment, and then we'll go into something else. There are some thoughts as well related to grief, some signs that someone's grieving might feel like it's unfair that your person is dying. Being concerned, we've seen some questions, right, of, oh, is my parent going to be there for my birthday or graduation? If not, who's going to be there for me in those moments? So being worried about that and not being sure if they're going to have their caregiver or someone else taking care of them. For children, especially in younger children, a lot of signs when they're grieving is behavioral. They may have some regression. So someone who was potty trained might go back to have accidents during the night, but during the day as well. Or someone who used to speak developmentally would be able to like make full sentences, might go back to more of a few sentences. Yeah, like so you can see those signs. You can see a lot of meltdowns, tantrums, being able to not being sure how they can express themselves, and then it's going to show up in that. Not being, if they're confused and not sure what their emotion is, then you'll probably see some of those behavior. Avoiding, sometimes it's an avoidance of school affection or attention, but sometimes they will seek more attention as well, or more affection as well. They can be very controlling. They might feel so worried that they weren't in control when their person died, when their parent died, or when their sibling died, that they want to control everything now. And then when they're not in control, you can see those meltdowns and having a hard time. And then spiritually, even in younger children, you may see them in questioning of their faith. If it's a family who prays a lot and believe in a God, for example, well, they might question that. They might feel a disconnection and refuse the ritual that as a family they used to do, or refuse to pray, or feel like they don't want to do that anymore. So that can show up in teenagers. You can see that a lot because they will be questioning a lot, but you can also see that in younger children and then tweens, like we call them. You can see all those signs. You can see just a few of those signs. And then sometimes you might see not many signs. And it doesn't mean that the child or the youth isn't grieving. It might just be that they're more withdrawn a little bit and keeping things inside a little bit, but it doesn't mean that they're not grieving. It's going to show up for everybody differently. And then I think this is a good moment to show the iceberg that we're loving here. Is when you look at an iceberg, you only see, here is in our picture, we see both outside of the water and then under the water. But when you see an emotion, or when you see some signs of grief, you will see the behavior, you will see the emotion, and you may assume something, you may think something, when in reality there's a whole lot that is hiding under the water. So it's always good to be curious with children and youth and explore what is actually hiding behind that sign, what is actually hiding behind that behavior or that emotion, because it might be completely different. There are a lot of children who will, and even adults, who might show anger because it's an emotion that is seen as strong in our society, in the Occidental culture, but when in reality they might feel sad, but sadness is seen as vulnerable sometimes if you're at school or something and you don't want to cry, so you will act as angry because you don't want to show that sadness, for example. Sometimes you do it consciously and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't really know actually why you're doing it or if you're doing it, but this is how it shows up as a way of protecting yourself because you don't want to be vulnerable in front of others. There are many ways. Anger is the easy example that a lot of people can relate to, but there are so many other examples, and that every time you meet someone, every time you engage with someone, especially as a healthcare provider and a professional, it's hard to be vulnerable in front of someone when you meet them at the beginning or when you're not sure how or why are they going to be there for you. So it's you usually put up a front, right? You will usually say things but maybe mean something else. I've had so many children tell me something that seemed completely like, meaningless, and I'm fine, I'm okay, or this is no big deal, I'm not grieving. Or a parent seeing their child, they're going to school, grades haven't changed, things are good, the child is okay, but when you look under the water, the child is actually struggling a lot, and there are a lot of emotions, and they are full on into their schoolwork because that's the only way that they're not fully focused on their loss and feeling like they can function and control something a little bit, right? If you're having straight A's all over and you're doing your homeworks and everything, you feel in control. If you don't focus on that and you're in your grief and you feel like you're gonna cry at school all day long, maybe as a teenager you don't want to do that, so you'll go the opposite way, and then it's hard when you don't look under the water to know, when you're not curious to know. Yeah, there is a comment that says, don't be surprised by anything or any behavior, even humor, or many things concurrently. Yeah, definitely. Humor is a huge way of coping. And doesn't mean because you're laughing or you're smiling that you're not grieving. Like that, yeah, no, definitely not. Love that, definitely. If you want to skip to the next one for a few example, yeah, that we were saying, like some people might see that someone is doing well and doing their own things when in reality they're struggling. Often also the iceberg is a great way of imagining this, but there's also the duck. So when you look at the duck in the water, you know they seem so at peace, so calm, so good. When you look under the water, they're all, I don't know if they're paused, I don't even know how you call that, but they are going so hard to stay where they are. That's the same thing, right? So we got to be curious, we got to look under the water to see what's happening. And that can be with asking questions, that can be with actively listening, that can be with just being curious and being there and saying, I'm here. If you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. I'll listen. But we'll talk more about those strategies in just a little bit.
This is a great exercise to do with, in our context, kids and youth, but also certainly with adults, because it can be a way to recognize some of those unconscious things that they might be presenting to the outside world, but to really allow that space to say, oh yeah, I really just am deeply, deeply worried that my second parent is also going to die. or the big one we hear all the time, and Rosalie and I speak about this one often with kids, is they're worried that they'll forget about their person or they won't remember everything. But that's a really scary thing to say out loud. And so often we might bring that up and say, you know, are you worried that you might forget? And talk about that. So this can be a really neat exercise to do with young people. A comment saying, so true. We'll focus on something that they are in control because they can't control something else. Grief. Go back to work can be very healthy, but as long as we don't drown ourselves in it. Absolutely. Yeah. Routine can be great. Routine can return us to some feelings of normalcy. And it can also be a way that we deeply bury some of the things that we really need to be making space for.
Yeah, we often have parents who we offer to engage in our grief support services as soon as they want, right? They can engage very quickly. And at first we'll go back to work. We'll need that feeling of normal and feeling of being in control. And then after a few months, will call us back and say, okay, I feel ready now, because it's heavy work. It's difficult to be intentional and focus on your grief and talk about your loss. So sometimes you do need to get back to work, and sometimes you do need that routine and feel somewhat normal. But yeah, at one point it might catch up to you, for sure. Grief versus normal kid stuff, right? We with children and adolescents, we often see that as adults, as caregivers, as parents, we're really worried quickly, either if they show many grief reactions or if they don't show grief reactions. And there will be like things that we see, right? A child turns 2 and start having tantrums, and then if they just recently lost a parent or a sibling, you will be worried. Oh, is it grief? Is it a grief reaction? Are they reacting to losing their sibling? Or a preteen that will have like fast mood changes. Every age have their own little quirks and then challenges. But the tricky thing is that usually it's both. It's hard to know, is it the typical developmental stage that they're at, or is it grief? A good way as healthcare providers is to really listen to those parents' worries and those caregivers when they express that to us, and exploring how has that changed since the death, or how has that changed if we're anticipating a death? Like, is there something that changed recently? Was there a loss that they experienced recently? How long has this been going on? Like, is this something that is, it's been a few times in 3 weeks, then maybe we don't need that professional counseling. Is it every single day and everybody's worried in the house? Yeah, maybe we should consult someone else who can support us. So really have those big conversations with parents, with caregivers, but also sometimes to reassure them that both is okay, right? Grief is a normal reaction to something abnormal, like losing someone when you're a child, and then the fact that they're either reacting or not reacting is okay, as long as we're supporting them and keeping an eye on them. So as long as a child will have trusted adults in their life to go to talk about their grief and receive support for their grief, they will be okay. So it's okay if a child, a teenager avoids the house and wants to hang out with their friends, as long as they can come back home and talk with an adult about, oh yeah, okay, I'm avoiding home because this is what's been happening. Or yeah, no, I like hanging out with my friends. So it's a fine balance of reassuring parents who are caring and worried about their children, and knowing when is this something we need to support in a more structured way. but it's usually both, so it's hard. Someone mentioned something similar earlier, that we need to talk more about death, about dying, about grief, but we also need to change the perspective that the goal of hanging out with someone deep in grief isn't to cheer them up. It's to help them know they're not alone. As human, we're uncomfortable in sadness and in hurting and in grief, and we often quickly go to those cheering up someone or saying something to make them feel better, when in reality, just being there with them in that wave of grief and in that emotional is okay, right? And is more than enough. It's helpful to just sit there and be there with them. Sarah, I see you're unmuted yourself.
Yeah, there's a quote, I think it's maybe in a Megan Devine video, where she talks about sometimes the most supportive thing is to just let your person be in pain. And sometimes that can be one of the most difficult things, but the most supportive, not trying to change it, just being there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm conscious of time, so I do want to keep us going to our next section. But I'll take a moment just to pause in case there's any questions about the first half of the presentation.
I think you guys have been doing a good job of keeping up in the chat. There's just been, quite a few comments around. I think people are really, what you're sharing is really resonating with them.
Great. Okay, great. That's lovely. I've figured out how to have slides and questions, so I can kind of keep up a little bit now. But something we'll move to speak now about is communication principles. So in terms of speaking with children, the most effective way to continue to build trust and to continually foster a relationship where a child will continue to trust that adult, whether it be a parent, caregiver, a teacher, a social worker, a person in their life, is to be honest and direct, no euphemisms. We'll go into that a little bit more. Creating that balance between that modeling, right? That leading the child and asking if this is something they want to speak about and introducing ideas, while also listening to them. And if a child says, okay, I need to stop now, we need to listen to that too. Inviting questions. Maybe there's something that a parent or caregiver is wondering, and how can you phrase that as a question for a child to help them explore that? And as well as responding when a child or young person does have a question, bringing that forward. Modeling is a really, really powerful way to help support children in grief. So we'll move to that as well. So a concrete strategy that I find really helpful and I use often in counseling spaces with children and youth, and also in supporting parents and caregivers, is this idea of the three W's. So this particular phrase we got from Sick Kids. They have a handout on talking to kids about serious illness, and it's recognizing that we don't need to have all the answers, because quite frankly, often we don't have answers. And kids are often asking questions that we as adults might have as well. And so you don't need to have all the answers. It's okay to wonder about things together, to wish that things might be different, to wish that things may or may not be possible, and to worry about hard things. And I think we spoke about it earlier, but that invitation to worry about hard things together, because often if a child is left alone with their own imagination, they will dream up and think up things that are much more significantly worse than what might actually be happening. I think also it's really important to recognize that children and youth have very impressive hearing, and they can hear things both audibly, things that are talked about around them, but also they can really listen to those nonverbal cues. And so recognizing that a child might be holding a worry that you don't even recognize. And so, saying to them, I'm wondering if there's anything that you're worried about, but are maybe a bit scared to say out loud. Or saying, I also really wish that your sister was going to be at your birthday party. I wish that was true. I worry about what our family might look like when dad dies. I worry about, but I also know that I can take care of you and that I'm a safe person for you. So that balance of wanting to make sure that the child is feeling that support. Another piece of information that we think is really important is using factual language to talk about death. And this can be intimidating and can feel scary, but it's actually a really empowering way to ensure that children are getting the right and proper information. So how to explain died to a child. And we have a video coming up that does a beautiful job of supporting this concept, but is to say that the body has stopped working and cannot start working again. Their heart has stopped beating and their lungs have stopped breathing. Their body cannot see, smell, think, or feel anymore. We're avoiding any euphemisms. And we'll get into a few, again, we're sort of doing building blocks with these slides. So we'll move into that a little bit more, but really just these concrete phrases to really ensure that we're giving children the language to use that is empowering for them. So talking about illness and death. So words to avoid would be something like the word sick. Your grandma died because they were sick. This can actually be kind of scary for kids because they get sick all the time. Holy cold and flu season, right? That they get sick all the time. I caught a cold, right? There are all these pieces of lingo that just exist, whereas it can be important to use the language, name the illness. Grandma died because she had lung cancer. Your brother had a heart condition. We've now all been tested and it is not a genetic condition. Using the actual name, I have heard, again, in our context of pediatric palliative care, we often know children that have progressive life-limiting illnesses that have incredibly long and complex titles. And I have met siblings age 4 that can rhyme off the entire name of their siblings' diagnosis, and they're so proud of that. And I think that that's such an empowering thing for that young person to know. Avoiding words like passed away, lost. A kid might get lost in IKEA, and we find them again. So it would be really reasonable for a child to say, oh, we lost grandpa last night. Okay, let's go find him. He's probably at his house, right? Some of these concepts, kids can be so concrete. And so using words like died, dying. These are words that speak to the specific instance. It's not lightening or softening something or creating unnecessary confusion. We spoke about stigmatized grief. Devastatingly, mental health can still be such a stigmatized aspect of our society. And so we're moving away from using committed suicide and using words like died by suicide, caused their own body to die. There are some incredible resources that we can link as well that exist specifically for supporting young people and children following the death of a suicide. And I think that's a really, it just speaks to the need for having really credible resources to talk about hard things so no one's feeling that they're supporting anyone alone. One thing I might also say, I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'm remiss to not have mentioned, you might learn things in this presentation tonight. I mean, we're all constantly learning all the time and be like, oh, I've said that, I say that. And maybe be a bit hard on yourself that, I should have known better, and we start shooting on ourselves. And I think it's really important to recognize that we're doing the best we can with what we know. So as you continue to learn and move through this life, we start integrating these things as we go. There are so many times that I've said the wrong thing. But we learn from it and we move on and we're honest and we're awkward and we just keep going and keep showing up. So I did just want to mention that. Phrasing versus other options. So sometimes I think we hear phrasing so often that we can't even think about another way to say something. So instead of assuming how someone feels, you must feel. How is your grief today? How is it affecting you? How is it showing up for you? Any sentence that starts with at least can be really dismissing and dismissive. And so when someone says, a big one that we hear is after following a perinatal loss, somebody might say, well, at least you know you can get pregnant. That is so hurtful because they're grieving that baby that they had all these dreams and hopes for. And so we move to better options, which include, thank you for sharing with me. What has this been like for you? Assumptions that somebody might have spiritual beliefs can also be a way that shuts down a conversation. So again, that curiosity, that openness. Even if you've experienced a similar loss, it's really important to remember that everyone experiences it uniquely and differently. So I love this phrase, my ex died, my dad died too, but I know grief is different for everyone. How was Father's Day for you? So really acknowledging that opens up a balancing act, right? Of maybe we can be two people that can talk about this really unique experience of a death, but also I'm letting and recognizing that, of course, we're going to feel uniquely about it. Let me know if there's anything I can do. This is one of the most well-meaning phrases because it's often very truthfully meant, but that puts the burden upon the person who is grieving. And specifically when we're talking about kids, they may have no idea what they need from one moment to the next. Same, quite frankly, can be said for adults. And so really being specific, I'm on my way to the grocery store. Can I pick something up for you? I'm picking the kids up from school today. Do you want me to pick up Timmy? So really being concrete. Another great way in languaging for speaking about illness and death is addressing the 6 C's. So again, naming the condition, naming the impacts that it might have, what happens and what's happening next. So giving that information, taking the lead of the child, but also making sure that you're giving enough information that that child can feel empowered to know and maybe expect what's coming up. Can I catch it? I think I mentioned this earlier. That language is so common. I caught a cold. I caught COVID. We use this language all the time, but a child might not know that cancer isn't contagious. And so they might see that their person is in a bed wearing a mask. Kids are very used to masks right now, but they might not know then that they can still go up and hold their person's hand or hug them or cuddle up and get in bed with them if that feels comfortable. So dismissing some of those assumptions that kids might hold that as adults we might not even think about. So for instance, sometimes when I'm helping prepare a sibling to go into a room to see their sibling, we'll talk about what they might see in the room. You're going to see that Patrick is attached to a cord that feeds into his arm. That's helping to keep him comfortable. It's got a liquid dripping into it, and it might beep when the liquid needs to be refilled. He's lying comfortably in a bed. You can walk right up and touch him, but make sure that we're touching his right arm because that arm doesn't have any medicine going into it. So again, that really being specific. Did I cause it? This one's really significant. Children might think they caused it. An example is we had one of my colleagues shared this one recently with me was a child had been asked to put the groceries away and they just got distracted. They forgot. And so the mom came home and saw the groceries still out and had to put them all away. And a few weeks later, their other mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so that young person carried with them that they thought they gave their mom cancer because they'd left the chicken out on the counter. My colleague was sharing, she didn't hear about that worry till months later. And so kids have this beautiful, but can also be misleading sense of magical thinking that they can cause something to happen. So did I cause it? So checking in on that. Can I cure it? Again, that magical thinking, maybe if I keep my room perfectly clean, my mom will get better and she'll come home. Who will take care of me? This is incredibly important if it's a caregiver who is dying. Kids worry about who will take care of them, especially if they're worried or have seen really big grief reactions in the second caregiver who's not dying. It's really important for kids to know that you can be sad and grieving and still take care of them. So for instance, some kids might see massive grief reactions. You can't control if a police officer comes to your door and informs you that your partner died in a car accident. So your child might see the rawest form of your grief. However, what you can do in those moments that come after is say, I was overcome. That was shocking news. I can be really upset and I can still parent you. And you can also really turn and look to your aunt for support if you're scared. So really creating that connection, which again, then leads into how can I connect to people I care about? So making spaces in ways that either ahead of the death or following the death, you can have those ways that they can connect. Maybe it's a corner of the house where they put little notes in a jar and they write what they're thinking. And so that the family can go look at them after. Child can also believe they need to support the adult. Yes. Adults often are trying to protect their kids. So often kids are trying to protect the adults in their lives. And so sometimes that's why creating and making space for the child to either come for counseling or have a trusted adult in their life can kind of make for that other space that they can talk about what they may not feel safe or comfortable to talk to their caregiver about. Do you ever find that magical thinking is ever associated with OCD? Example, if I clean my room, my mom won't die. Does that ever lead to obsessive cleaning their room to try and control the situation? Definitely, quite possibly. I think there's a lot of intersection with grief and mental health. And so with a scenario like that, what I would definitely encourage is, which we do often at the hospice, is having that ongoing relationship with mental health professionals who might be supporting a child with their mental health needs, while also allowing that space for grief, because neither of them happen in a vacuum. This would also be something that I would say, in terms of noticing, was this a behavior or something that was happening prior to the diagnosis or to the death? Or is this something that has come up or has started since the diagnosis or the death? Because that might help tease out a little bit. Is this an acute reaction and response, or is this creating, or has this kind of brought on a more significant mental health need? So we're going to do a video again. So let's see if I can just get that going.
Explaining to a child that someone has died. When a child first encounters the death of someone important to them, it can be a shock because they may be unaware that people in their life will die. Here are some tips for supporting a child when someone dies. Use simple language. It's important to use simple language appropriate to your child's age and understanding. You might say, I have something sad to tell you. Grandad died this morning. Explain what dead means. You may need to explain to a young child that when somebody dies, their body stops working. You might say, a dead body doesn't breathe because their lungs are no longer working and their heart has stopped. A dead body can't move. It'll be very quiet and still. A dead body can't feel anything, so there will be no pain. When someone has died, they can't ever come back to life again. Don't be afraid to show your feelings. Children look to adults around them for cues on how to behave. They will decide from this whether it's okay to talk about what's happened and to show their emotions. Be honest and show your child that it's okay to feel sad and to also have different feelings at different times. Explain that death is normal. What a child sees on the news or in films can give them a skewed version of death and dying, concentrating on the dramatic and the traumatic. This can result in children feeling anxious about death. Reassure your child that death is a normal part of the life cycle, just like being born. You might say, "Grandma was very old, and when bodies are very, very old, they don't work as well as they used to. Eventually they stop working altogether, and this is what's happened to Grandma." Allow your child to express their grief. An older child might not appreciate the relationship they had with the person who died until they're not around anymore. They can also no longer change anything about their relationship with that person. If they have any regrets, it can help some young people to write a letter expressing what they wish they'd said or done when that person was around, or simply writing down or sharing memories about them. Grief can be delayed. The closeness of the relationship a child or young person has with the person who's died will influence their response. The death of a relative with whom they've had very little contact may be an event that causes little upset, and their grief may be short-lived. However, sometimes their grief can be delayed and may show itself when attending a family occasion where they become aware that someone important is missing and always will be. Recognise that each relationship is unique. When a family member dies, it's an opportunity for a family to grieve together. It's important to acknowledge, though, that each person has their own unique and individual relationship with them. Everyone in the family will experience the loss in their own way. For help in supporting your child when someone has died, please call our helpline on 0800 02.
So Winston's Wish is a UK organization that has some phenomenal and incredible resources for supporting young people. So one of the pieces we wanted to highlight is this comes up all the time in the work I do with kids, that I don't know what to say when somebody says to me, "I'm sorry that your dad died." And like, what am I supposed to say back? Okay, it's not okay. And I think this maybe comes from so often, especially in childhood, we're teaching accountability and we're teaching so many different lessons. And I'm sorry is a pretty big one. But often it has a relation to, oh, you pushed Johnny on the playground, please go say sorry. And so it can really get a bit mixed up for kids. And so some of the feedback that we've heard from both kids and adults who are grieving is saying, I'm sad to hear about and using the person's name. A big one that's so powerful is, I don't know what to say. I don't know how you feel, but I'm here to listen. I remember when sharing a story. I know that today is their birthday and I'm thinking of you. These really simple things that might feel little, but aren't little to the people who are experiencing them. Kids can say and think so many things. And I think difficult questions are some of the most common worries that people have. What if I walk in the room and they ask me something I can't answer? My bigger worry is, what if they're not asking you the questions? To me, that's a bigger worry. And so a difficult question is an opportunity for connection. And often it really isn't about the answer. It's about that connection. It's about being a space where they feel safe enough to ask you this. So trying to not avoid the question. So for instance, often I'm a social worker. I'm not a medical professional. And often I'll get asked by kids really medical questions. And I'll have to say to them, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll look into it. And it's really important that you follow up and say, you know what? I can pull in one of our doctors and they can explain to you what that procedure will look like for your sibling, so that it doesn't feel as scary. So making sure that you're being accountable to the young person. Common themes, a big one is, was it my fault? And is it okay to feel happy sometimes? And that one is, yeah, you're going to feel sadness and joy often at the same time. Sesame Street has some amazing resources on especially answering difficult questions. They said it's for, when I was reading them, up to age 6. I think it could be up to adulthood. They were just really strong communication strategies. So I would highly recommend taking a look at those. Moving into cultural considerations. I could not say it better than this quote. So I did put this whole quote on the slide, which is, there are many different cultural beliefs, rituals, and traditions that influence how a family deals with a death. When interacting with families from a cultural background different from your own, you may worry that you'll unintentionally say something that offends the family. It can help to keep in mind that while there can be a broad range of traditions and belief, grief is a universal experience. Being present, open, curious, and accepting, you can offer support in a respectful and effective way. So this is from kidsgrief.ca, which is probably my most recommended resource that I share with anybody, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So ensuring a culturally humble approach to grief. There's lots of ways to engage in a conversation with a young person. Can I learn more about how you or your family grieve? Can you teach me how? Can you draw for me what this might look like? What would I need to know about you so I can be of help or support? Show me. Some of these might come from the parent or caregiver. Some of these might come directly from the child or young person. But it can be really important to just ensure that we're being really respectful and creating that space to say everyone has an individual expression of grief. I think also as well, it's important to acknowledge that you may yourself hold similar spiritual beliefs or religious background. Really important to make sure that you're not making assumptions based on that as to how the person might be grieving. And so I think often sometimes it can be an unconscious bias that we recognize. And so really tuning into that to make sure that you're not making any assumptions without really being open and curious with the person. Livingmyculture.ca has some phenomenal resources that I would very highly recommend. So grieving children and youth will grieve at every stage as they develop. So regardless of what age the death happens at, from that point on, or if it was anticipatory grief, they will grieve at every developmental stage, because at each developmental stage, their concept of death, their understanding will have shifted and grown in time. And so that means their relationship with that person also shifts and changes in time. I've had some really powerful conversations with young people that have come back in the years since their person has died, and they've shared different reflections with me. And it's really, really powerful. So some important considerations is to ensure that you're adapting to each child's specific abilities and needs. So that could include educational needs, neurodiversity. And one of the most important things is to work with a trusted adult who can support the grieving child. Ensure that you're using the child's preferred method of communication. For instance, there are some incredible PECS boards for explaining death and dying to a young person. It might be using their technology to help communicate. Unfortunately, a misconception that has existed is that individuals with neurodiversity do not or cannot understand death and grief in the same way. That is just fundamentally not true. Do we need to ensure that we're caring for that young person in a way that is developmentally or age appropriate, whatever their circumstance may be? Yes, but everyone can understand grief because everyone can understand love. The Children's Grief Foundation of Canada has some really wonderful resources. I'm not going to spend too much time on the slide because I'm conscious of time. This is a great activity where, again, you're just highlighting for a young person that grief can be felt everywhere. It's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. So this can be a neat activity to do, which we'll include in slides coming up. I'm going to skip over this video, but we'll send it. But the theme here is that kids grieve in puddles. I think Rosalie maybe briefly mentioned this. So when they jump in the puddle, they're in the depth of it. They're in that grief. Kids have a beautiful ability to be able to jump out of that puddle too, and run and play and be with their friends. And I've had parents come up to me like, oh my God, they don't get it. They don't understand. They're not grieving. And in fact, I'll say, no, they're grieving really well. That's really appropriate. And so it's a really lovely way to explain grief. And I'll explain this to kids too, and use this video with kids as well, because sometimes they'll say, I can just go play on the playground and I'll kind of forget that my dad died. Is that weird? And I'll say, no, I think that's really normal, actually. And then they'll say like, yeah, and then I get on the school bus and I can't stop crying. I'm like, yeah, it's normal too. In terms of ages, so at this age, 2 to 4, kids have a difficulty understanding that death is irreversible, or is, so that's a typo. They might say, yeah, I know my dad is dead, or I know my mom is dead, but my mom is going to be at my birthday party. And they truly believe that because there isn't that ability to recognize the permanence of something. They struggle to understand the body has stopped working, why language is so important. They're starting to express, or they're starting to understand death is universal. Incredibly important to maintain routine, especially in those starting and end points of the day. There's going to be a lot of repetition needed in this age group, short, honest answers. I find it really helpful to empower other people to know some of this language, so that, for instance, if it's a caregiver that has died, that, let's say, aunts and uncles also are able to repeat some of these conversations so that it's not always falling on that living caregiver as well. Creating opportunities for play and physical and emotional nurturing is so significant. Sesame Street, again, fabulous resources. Ages 5 to 8, there's a shift here. There's some more of that concrete thinking. Those magical thoughts are really present. So again, that example I gave of leaving the chicken out on the counter. There's a misbelief that death is reversible. Again, a lot of repetitive, a lot of questions. Sometimes this will throw up alarm bells, but they might have a desire to visit with the deceased. To me, that's a recognition that they're just missing that connection with that person, and that wouldn't send up alarm bells for me. I would probably do a mental health and suicide assessment if I had worries. And I think that's a really important thing to distinguish. But I also think reassuring caregivers and parents that it's completely normal that this 8-year-old child wants to and wishes they could visit with the person that died. Allowing kids to talk, making spaces for them to speak, being patient and succinct, creating opportunities for big energy, play, being with friends, etc. A lot of nurturing again, and responding to the emotion. I know you miss your brother. Things aren't the same. We'll come back to this if we have time, but I don't want to miss out on the other age groups. But this is a video we'll send out. So this young person received counseling at Roger Neilson Children's Hospice, and was brave and said yes to filming a video. And so we encourage you to watch this video if you have time. And I see some questions in the chat, and I'll absolutely come to those. Don't worry. Ages 9 to 12. This is where we're noticing now that there's a more ability to have an abstract concept of death and grief. There becomes more of awareness of their own mortality, that death is something that could happen to them. They're starting to think more long-term. They're having more of that ability to say, okay, if my sibling dies, does that mean that they won't be there in 5 years? They're having more of that building ability to notice that. Developmentally appropriate, there's that shift from family unit to friends starting to happen here. That can also mean that they're starting to notice if they're having differences from their friends. If it is a caregiver that's died, and this was from a two-parent household, and they're going to events and they're noticing that a lot of other families have 2 or 3 or 4 parents attending and they only have one, that can be something really noticeable that maybe they wouldn't have noticed in younger ages. Compartmentalization, again, that puddle jumping, that can be really effective and not worrying in a number of situations. It can maybe become more worrying if you're only seeing that ability to distract. If there's no there's no ability to move into the grief. And so that's maybe where my worry would come a bit more. Do you see a theme? We're answering questions clearly and accurately with facts. We're building on what they already know. We're continuing that conversation. We're providing more activities, continuing routine, modeling, and being a good listener. This slide makes me laugh because a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old are so vastly different. So I recognize that. So maybe we do need to do a bit of a rejig, but fundamentally, in this age group, this is what's happening along a spectrum. A more fulsome concept of death may hold on to unspoken magical thoughts. I check in on this with every teenager I meet with because they might still think that that chicken caused the cancer. And so I ask every person I meet with about this. They're more able to anticipate the fact that there are impacts in the future. My sibling won't graduate high school. We won't be able to all be together at this really important family event. This is also where there can be concerns about genetic vulnerability. So there can be some, especially depending on how the person died, some time to discuss that. Maybe a stronger sense of the deceased, looking for connections, openness to experiencing the signs. A lot of that shift to reliance on peers, again, very naturally. Ask open-ended questions, continue those opportunities for independence and privacy, while also making sure that you're allowing that space for connection, because sometimes pushing away is actually an invitation for wishing for closeness. Sometimes it's not, but ensuring that you are really allowing for some of that space. Reinforce safety and security and setting clear goals, because there can be some increase in risk-taking behaviors at this age. I really like this quote from a young person. I lost my mom, and so for me, the big challenge of school, even now, is people assume that your mom is the one who takes care of the paperwork and stuff. So there will be like, oh, give this to your mom, give this to your mom. So what I found really helpful is when they said your parent or guardian and stuff like that. That's what I like. That was really helpful for me. When we're talking to groups of teachers and educators, will often speak about this, you know, being really cognizant during any activity that has a relation to a family. I actually met with a young person yesterday, and their school was doing an activity on tell us about your family. And this made him really nervous because he didn't really want to say in front of his entire class that his brother died recently. His close friends know, his teacher knows, but that activity felt really uncomfortable. And on the surface, that could be a really, really great activity, get to know each other's families. But that can actually bring a lot of anxiety. So allowing some flexibility and introducing that. Skipping that too. I think this question came up. So some favorite grief activities. One of my absolute favorites is a worry. I'll usually actually call it a worry and wonder jar. So for some kiddos who can draw or write, what we'll talk about doing is setting up a jar somewhere in their house where it's not going to get knocked over. And we'll get pieces of paper prepared, and they can write or draw worries or wonders that they have and put them in the jar. And together with their parent or caregiver or trusted person in their home, they might come up with a time of day that they'll go through those questions, because it can be really intimidating as a young person or adult for that matter to ask a really hard question out loud. So by doing the act of writing it down and putting it in the jar, having a bit of time away, it can allow for some of that to happen a bit more naturally. Memory boxes, decorating the outside with things that your person loved and putting inside them things that they did as well. I had a number of families have created Spotify playlists, or I shouldn't say something specific, music playlists on any platform that you so choose. Creating a playlist together as an activity of legacy before the person dies, or after, songs that either make you think of them or that you sang together. Writing a comic or a storybook of their life. These are some of my favorite, and some of the links we'll share as well have a host of activities too. Theme-wise though, I think the main theme when I'm doing a grief activity is often on connection, and helping ensure that that young person knows that their connection doesn't go away when their person dies. This is an exercise that we'll do as well. I won't walk us through it, but it's called a safe place exercise or safer place exercise, depending on your language, where we'll do some imagery and mindfulness so that we can create a space that a young person can go to in their mind when they need to have a feeling of safety if they're feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated. I'm sorry for having to go fast through some of these slides. But we're almost done, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for some open discussion or questions.
Thanks, Sarah. I think for activities and sessions with grieving children, it's hard to, if you're someone who worked in mental health or have a specific like CBT that you really like, or DBT, those approaches are very structured. In grief, you meet them where they're at in that session today. So it's hard sometimes to plan ahead and know exactly what activities. So one of our suggestions is often to have a few things prepped. They might come in and want to do that memory box, want to connect more with that person, or they might want to come in that day and want to do a body map. So that slide that you saw where they talk more about their feelings, like where they're at in their grief. They might also come in that day and have so many questions about death and what happened in this, and your session will be focused on that, and then facilitating with the trusted adults. How can you have those conversations? So it's hard to plan, but we really wanna, the main goal is to have that space for them, because grief, like we said, isn't something we're trying to fix. We're trying to open that space and be there for them in their grief, and then sit side by side with them. So we have those fun activities. Yeah, play is part of that, because children process things through play. So there's definitely many toys in our playroom. But it's one part of it, right? Because everybody will need something different. So there isn't one specific approach. It's more meeting them where they're at and providing those couple of activities where they can either connect, process, be there, and have someone they can do that with. So this brings us a little bit of like, when do you seek professional help? Because everybody will have experienced grief in your life. It's not everybody that needs counseling or that needs professional support for their grief. So it really depends. But everybody, if you have seen that pyramid in the past, everybody needs some explanation, some reassurance, right? Having those conversations that we talked about earlier about death and dying and grief, and normalizing those grief reactions and answering those questions. Every single children and youth need that, not only for grief, but in life in general, right? And then some of them might need that organized grief support, like those group, like a peer support group, or being with other children and youth who are understanding a little bit what they're going through, meeting a professional or a team of grief experts who can normalize and provide them those few strategies to cope with those big waves of grief. And that can look like mindfulness, that can look like other strategies, some grounding strategies. it's different for everyone, but a lot of them will need that space, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them will do. When you're worried because those grief reactions are either present for like a very long time and then don't change in time, that's when you want to seek support a little bit. Or if there is no, that numbness stay there for weeks and months, that's when you maybe want to seek professional support. You might want to seek professional support right away, but keep in mind that right the first few weeks it's kind of like a cloud of chaos, right? And everything changed. There's so many changes. Sometimes there are secondary losses if a child lose a parent or a caregiver, because the routine's going to be different. The solo caregiver now is also grieving and trying to navigate all of that. Sometimes they need to move, change school. Like there are so many things that are happening. It's hard to tell the first couple weeks if that child will need counseling. So it's the first few weeks is mostly just like surfing that waves, and being able to be there. A good thing is just you can send them our way and then we'll assess and see if they need support. But it's not everybody who needs professional support. We might be worried, but they don't all need it. And the rest of our presentations, we wanted to provide resource. We never have enough. But first we wanted to plug just that we have a day of training, a pediatric palliative care symposium on April 16. That is coming super soon. We have a key speaker, Mickey Burns, who will be there and do a nice presentation on young grievers for us. So if you want to learn more, register. And then we also have a new camp that we're launching this year, a Young Grievers Camp, which is a free sleepaway weekend camp in June. If you know children or adolescents from between 7 and 17 who have experienced the death of someone, you can send them our email and then we'll give them the info.
Last up, please take a look at these resources, which can all be found at kidsgrief.ca workbooks. The big ones that I'll plug is My Life, My Grief, Me and My Illness, Me and Their Illness, which might be applicable for this group, and then Medical Assistance in Dying. And then the rest of the resources, we've got a number of books and podcasts, so we'll send those out and along. And I see Val, thank you all so much for your time tonight, and joining us together and gathering with us to speak about kids' grief, getting awkward and curious with the young people that we work with and come alongside. And thank you all for doing everything that you do for the community that we all are a part of.
Thanks, everyone.
So yeah, I've put Tara, do you feel like we had covered pretty much everything in the chat, or is there
Yeah,
anything
I
else
thought you
wanna-
guys were doing a great job. I didn't want to interrupt. You had
Yeah.
good flow and it was great.
So now it's just the kudos and the thank yous. And so on behalf of everybody who's here and our team, this was a great presentation, a really nice overview of theory and strategies and resources. But I also just feel like you shared your hearts with us. You know, you're just both such genuine people, and recognizing the work that you do day in and day out. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives. So a big thanks to Sarah and Rosalie, and a big thanks to everybody who took time on this last Thursday of February. We'll look forward to seeing you again in March. We're having an interesting session with the regional coroner and the Bereavement Association of Ontario on legal aspects on end-of-life care.